The pain was close to unbearable. He telephoned his wife from the main squadron office. She and their 2-year-old daughter lived in a summer house on the shores of the Wannsee. So far, Beata and young Lottie hadn't been troubled by the increasingly frequent RAF raids on the capital, though Messner, like many of his colleagues, wasn't sure how long this blessing would last. First thing this morning, moments before Messner had set off for the airfield, Beata had promised to lay hands on a dentist. Now all her husband wanted was a name and an address. Kunsen. She spelled out the name. Jewish? I'm told not. She gave him an address in Charlottenburg. You've talked to the man? Only his wife. She sounded nice. They're leaving for Leipzig tomorrow, but he can see you tonight as long as you're there between 9 and past. They live above the surgery, and if you've got the money, he might be able to find a little gold for the filling. Messner pulled a face. These days, if you could even lay hands on a dentist, they plugged teeth with tin alloy. Gold would be a godsend, but it would cost a fortune. You couldn't find anyone else? No. You tried? Of course I tried. And I'm your wife, by the way, not your secretary. Messner mumbled an apology. Getting by on nothing but soup, he said, did strange things to a man. Beata wanted to know whether he'd need something to eat when he finally got home. Messner was checking his watch. Nearly 7. I imagine that depends on Herr Kunsen, he said. Under normal circumstances, Charlottenburg was half an hour from Tempelhof, and as far as Messner knew, there were no expected raids this evening. In any event, the English bombers, few as they were, rarely turned up before 10, and so Messner settled down to sort out some of the last week's paperwork. Within minutes, the door opened and he was looking at the squadron adjutant, an ex-Heinkel pilot who'd lost a leg in a pre-war training accident, but whose web of connections seemed to include everyone in the Wilhelmstrasse. You're off home tonight, or sleeping here? Home. Best leave early. Luftgau Kommando are calling a raid for 9:30. Luftgau Kommando was the organization responsible for the nighttime defense of Berlin. They were in constant touch with a train of Freya radar stations stretching all the way to the North Sea. Flying time from the coast to Berlin was nearly 3 hours. We believe them? Messner asked. We believe anything. Goring's at the Russian embassy tonight, along with Ribbentrop. Molotov's in town. If I was British, I'd know where I'd be dropping my bombs. Molotov, Messner knew, was the Russian foreign minister. He'd heard his name mentioned on today's flight back from Munich, both times by Ribbentrop, the Reich's foreign minister, and one of the VIP passengers in the Ju-52. 9:30's early, Messner said. I expect it coincides with the cheese course. The Russians are mad about Handkasser, especially these days. The British spend their lives spoiling everyone else's party. It's one of the few pleasures they have left. The adjutant shot him a grin and limped out of the office. Messner listened to the tap-tap of his false leg as he disappeared down the corridor. The sensible thing would be to leave now, while driving in the blackout was still legal. The moment the siren sounded, all traffic had to come to a halt and park. But leaving at 8:30 would still give him plenty of time, and so he picked up his pen again, running his tongue over his throbbing gum, determined to get the better of the paperwork. Nearly an hour later he'd finished. Nearly 8:30. The adjutant was still at his desk down the corridor and looked up when Messner said good night. You're crazy. He tapped his watch. They're 25 minutes away. The British? Yeah. Messner ran across the hard standing to the allotted parking spaces. His own BMW was under repair, and he'd borrowed Beata's Volkswagen for this morning's trip. Now, in the darkness, he had a moment's difficulty getting the door open. Then he stirred the rattly old engine into life and headed for the long curl of concrete that led to the exit gate. A guard on the gate brought him to a halt with a torch. The adjutant had been right. The sirens would sound any minute. Messner gunned the engine. Travelling at night without headlights was, as he knew only too well, an acquired art. In the